Thank you for joining today's webinar, the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project Program Orientation for Long-Term Care, Assisted Living, and Independent Senior Housing Facilities. This program is one of a series of resources developed as part of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project, a statewide initiative to support the emergency preparedness efforts of long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities in the state. The project is conducted by the Rhode Island Department of Health and supported with subject matter expertise from the Yale New Haven Health System Center for Emergency Preparedness and Disaster Response. Funding for this project was secured through a federal block grant administered by the Rhode Island Department of Health Climate Change Program. Today's presentation will provide an introduction to the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project, including an overview of the project and findings from the project's pilot phase. Resources and tools available as part of the program will also be presented, as well as best practices and lessons learned. Let's begin now with an overview of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project. The goal of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project is to support long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities in preparing for climate-related disasters through energy resiliency audits and the development of all hazards emergency plans that emphasize shelter in place. When conducted by facilities that serve seniors, these important emergency preparedness actions will reduce risk to vulnerable senior citizens and increase overall emergency preparedness levels of the facilities that serve them. Since 2010, Rhode Island has faced 4 presidentially declared disasters. These events, along with other extreme weather events, have challenged communities and made it clear throughout Rhode Island that there is a need to better prepare the most vulnerable populations for floods, hurricanes, blizzards, heat waves, extreme cold, and power outages. Superstorm Sandy drastically impacted Rhode Island's elderly community. 23 long-term care facilities were without commercial grid power, some for as many as 5 days, and 1 facility was forced to evacuate. Residents in assisted living residences and senior housing complexes also found themselves without power or support to keep them safe. During Winter Storm Nemo, 29 nursing homes and 15 assisted living residences lost commercial grid power. These experiences, supported by research in the field, have shown that the elderly are some of the most vulnerable to these impacts. The Senior Resiliency Project has engaged a broad spectrum of partners and stakeholders to assist long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities to prepare for disasters.
It doesn't rain like it used to.
It doesn't just rain anymore.
It's something that you will never, ever forget.
It's at the back of the facility here. We had about 10 feet of water.
Mother Nature is knocking on your front door.
It's here. Oh yeah. Sea level rises, we experience it.
It's not going away. After a big storm, the question is always rebuild or retreat.
I think the realities of living along the coast are it's a very dynamic system.
We saw all of the water sources that we would use for our water suppression for fire dry up.
As our population is getting older and our families are aging in place, it becomes ever increasingly important for housing authorities to start looking at preparedness in this way.
It's not a matter of will there be another superstorm or hurricane for our community. It's a matter of when.
As community leaders, it's one of the major concerns we have to talk about.
The Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project has engaged nearly 20 sites across Rhode Island that were directly impacted by Hurricane Irene, Superstorm Sandy, or Winter Storm Nemo. The project has worked with partners, stakeholders, and consultants to assist qualified facilities to reduce risk and increase preparedness to the benefits of seniors, facility staff, and organizations as a whole. The project occurred over 3 phases. In the pilot phase, one of each facility type was selected and began by conducting a detailed facility assessment, followed by an on-site visit by project staff to review self-assessment data and gain a better understanding of each facility. Utilizing the pilot phase findings, tools and resources were developed in support of project goals for future use statewide. Next, the project moved to the second phase, where additional funding was secured to expand the project to include additional sites. Finally, the project entered Phase 3, where the project was expanded statewide. Rollout included the development of additional resources, including 5 technical assistance webinars to support facilities in implementing the project's resources, and 11 quick reference guides to orient staff members who work at any of the 3 types of facilities. Let's focus on the pilot phase of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project and share some of the key findings from this initial project phase. The Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project pilot phase engaged one of each facility type. During this phase, sites were limited to 2 coastal counties in Rhode Island, with a participation requirement that the facility had lost power during at least one of the aforementioned storms. Participating facilities received an on-site assessment to review the self-assessment data and to gain a better understanding of each facility, and a detailed walkthrough of the facility to examine spaces and infrastructure. Areas examined in the pilot phase on-site assessment included generator and fuel supply locations, HVAC systems, fire suppression systems, resident and tenant rooms and common areas, kitchen and food storage, facility grounds and surrounding area, and maintenance and engineering spaces. Areas of need highlighted during the assessment process were addressed through the development of an energy resiliency plan and a shelter-in-place plan. Next, training sessions were conducted to educate facility staff on their ability to support residents during disasters. At the conclusion of each training session, the staff were asked to provide feedback which would guide the project going forward. 2 project summary workshops were also conducted. The first workshop was tailored to provide a summary of the project to long-term care and assisted living facilities, while the second provided similar content tailored to the independent senior housing complexes. The workshops were broken into these 2 groups based on the clinical infrastructure that was present at many of the assisted living and long-term care facilities that was not typically found at the independent senior housing facilities. Based on the pilot phase, the following findings were noted. Obtaining accurate facility self-assessment results requires a multidisciplinary team and sufficient time. In order to obtain exact and current answers to the assessment questions, many facilities needed to engage with diverse members of their staff and conduct research into certain assessment areas, such as facility structure. Some facilities also operated under assumptions about characteristics or with out-of-date information regarding their capabilities, so the assessment process proved to be a learning experience. Modern facilities are complex, and with issues such as staff turnover and facility modifications, obtaining a reliable assessment proved to be a time-consuming process. Facility self-assessments revealed that emergency power supply system and water supply issues are common areas for improvement. Many facilities did not have complete information about what their emergency power supply system covered or for how long. Facilities also found that in the event of a disruption of utilities that impacted water supply, potable and non-potable water would be a particular vulnerability. Energy resiliency plans were developed separately in the pilot phase, but were combined with shelter-in-place plans for the rest of the project. The planning considerations were common for these 2 issues, so a single plan eliminated redundancies and added efficiency to the process. Staff feedback from workshops and trainings was helpful to the project. Through written evaluations in the pilot phase, facility staff expressed their understanding of the importance of these issues, their desire to take action, and their satisfaction with the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project. Finally, the pilot phase demonstrated a need for resources and tools to support areas such as facility self-assessment, shelter-in-place planning, staff training, hazard vulnerability analysis process, and resident personal preparedness. Next, let's take a look at the resources that have been developed for long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities through the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project. Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project resources available to support long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities are a self-assessment tool to evaluate a facility's energy resiliency and ability to shelter in place in the event of an emergency, a gap assessment planning process that guides facilities in addressing and prioritizing mitigation activities, a shelter-in-place plan template to facilitate development of formal planning efforts, a staff training presentation that supports facilities in educating staff related to shelter-in-place, a series of technical assistance webinars, and a collection of written and electronic quick reference guides. All of these resources are available to be downloaded for facility use from the Rhode Island Department of Health's website. Navigate to the address listed on the screen and click the Senior Resiliency Project link. The Facility Self-Assessment Tool is a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet which provides a menu of scripted answers to questions regarding a facility's ability to respond to a disaster that might impact utilities and require a facility to shelter in place. The tool guides users to examine multiple areas of their facility, including facility location and elevation, facility structure, utilities and resources, food and nutrition, clinical and non-clinical staffing and notification, alternate care, and resident and staff evacuation and movement. Next is the facility gap assessment process. Utilizing this process, facilities summarize their self-assessment results by developing two categories, one section that highlights their facility's strengths and another that lists their challenges. Facilities then develop a list of options to consider to address their vulnerabilities. Facilities share their gap assessment document with their leadership team to help them determine the way forward and prioritize actions. The next resource is a shelter-in-place plan template. This plan describes the systems and processes by which the facility will maintain operations prior to, during, and after a disaster that involves residents and staff remaining at the facility. The template plan covers the following critical areas: authorities and responsibilities, including how and when the plan is activated, the configuration of the emergency management team, and command and control. A description of the facility, including number of buildings, population housed, number of staff, and sheltering requirements. A description of utilities and resources, including emergency power generation, nutrition and hydration resources, ventilation and air conditioning contingencies, supply levels and overstocking options, and waste management processes. Food and nutrition processes, including alternate methods for meal preparation, identification of primary and backup food vendors, food and potable water storage, and pre-disaster stockpiling abilities. Clinical and staffing information, including definition of levels of care that will be provided and staff sheltering plans. Evacuation and movement information and triggers, and additional tools and resources such as personal preparedness checklists for staff, residents, and residents' families, pre-storm facility checklists, and hoteling rosters. The next resource is a facility staff training tool for long-term care and assisted living facilities. This Microsoft PowerPoint presentation can be modified to meet the unique needs of each facility and their shelter-in-place plan. Key topics include emergency management configuration, utilities and resources, food and nutrition, clinical and staffing concerns, and evacuation and movement. The Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project includes a series of technical assistance webinars, which can be viewed from the Rhode Island Department of Health's website. The series includes a project orientation webinar, a technical assistance webinar for each of the 3 participating facility types, and a Hazard Vulnerability Analysis Technical Assistance webinar. The final Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project resource is a series of 11 quick reference guides. These guides are designed to orient staff of long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities to each component of the project, or for anyone interested in learning more about the project. The Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project has highlighted important lessons learned. Facility structures and resources vary greatly from site to site. Each facility offered different services, had different levels of staffing support, varied in the number of residents served, and the functional level of the residents. Some facilities were part of large organizational networks, while others were freestanding. All of these factors impacted how the facility could best mitigate their vulnerabilities. Next, the project demonstrated that the level of emergency preparedness maturity from site to site was extremely broad. Facilities differed in their experience with planning, exercising, and resiliency capabilities. Generally, higher-level care facilities, such as long-term care facilities, had more formal plans in place. Newer facilities, while possessing many infrastructure upgrades, are not necessarily more resilient than older facilities. The factors that encompass preparedness are not automatically impacted by the traits of a modern facility, reminding us that a facility can fall anywhere on the spectrum of preparedness, no matter the age. Some aspects of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project were time-consuming to implement. Some facilities required 6 months or longer to complete the process. Competing priorities and staff turnover could cause significant disruption to a facility's engagement. Committed facility staff and engaged senior leadership were essential components to successful program completion. In line with other types of emergency preparedness training, facility staff training had to be highly adaptable and customized to meet the needs of a particular facility staff and the expectation of the site's leadership. Project-related training resources needed to be basic, with extensive adaptation on the part of participating sites required to meet each facility's training needs. The need for resident personal emergency preparedness planning emerged as an important issue for independent senior housing facilities. Program resources, such as the Resident Personal Preparedness Quick Guide, were developed to meet this need. In some cases, smaller public housing authorities required special considerations, and program templates were adapted to meet these facilities' unique needs. A modified self-assessment tool excluded items less relevant to the smaller independent housing authorities, such as food and nutrition infrastructure, as these sites generally do not offer food services to residents. Clinical considerations were also removed, as these sites do not offer clinical support to their residents. Other items that are more pertinent to these facility types were added, such as questions about resident engagement programs and personal preparedness activities. As the initial 3 phases of the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project come to a close, program results thus far indicate that the resources, program structure, and lessons learned could be adapted and replicated to meet the needs of long-term care, assisted living, and independent senior housing facilities in other states beyond Rhode Island. Finally, participating facilities throughout the program demonstrated that they were highly receptive to the support, resources, and technical assistance provided through the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project. Though competing priorities in today's complex healthcare and social service environments were always an issue, Rhode Island's committed facility staff members and senior leadership teams were driven to overcome obstacles, maximize strengths, mitigate vulnerabilities, and work to benefit the senior populations they serve. Through participation in the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project, facilities understood how their commitment and actions impacted their residents, staff, and facilities as a whole. If you have additional questions about any of the tools presented today or about the Rhode Island Senior Resiliency Project, please contact the Climate Change Program at doh.climate@health.ri.gov. Thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar and the Senior Resiliency Project. On behalf of the Rhode Island Department of Health, and also on behalf of Rhode Island senior residents and their families, thank you for all you do each day to protect the health and safety of the residents of Rhode Island.